worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh, my soul, and I will worship Your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing Your song again. Whatever may pass, oh, whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Oh yeah, bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, and I will worship Your holy name. Oh, You're rich in love, You're rich in love, and You're slow to anger. Your name is great, and Your heart is kind. For all Your goodness I'll keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. Yeah. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, and I will worship Your holy name. Sing on that day, on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near, and my time has come. Still my soul will sing Your praise unending. 10,000 years, and then forevermore. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, and I will worship Your holy name. And I will worship Your holy name. Oh, I will worship Your holy name. Ooh.
Hey everyone, Pastor James here from the Lake Stevens campus, coming at you for your daily motivation, encouragement video. Whenever you're watching this, whether it's in the morning or in the afternoon or even the evening, hopefully it finds your heart. We are in the YouVersion Bible in 1 Year app, and I've been doing this since I've been on staff here. I've enjoyed it every single time, every single year that I read through the Bible. I find new and important things that God is trying to reveal to me, and it just speaks to me. But this section of the Bible is probably one of my favorites, not just because it's a story of David and I just love his story, but I also I love the history behind how God has been so faithful to us. So you know that the reign of Saul, if you're following along, is coming to a conclusion, coming to an end. If you didn't know that, Spoiler alert, Saul's about to die. But before we get there, there's an interesting little story that a lot of times we just kind of gloss over and we just get to the next. We want to get to the battle and we want to get to the death of Saul, or we want to see what happens with David. And we typically find ourselves glossing over this part. So David, who didn't trust Saul, which I get it because Saul tried to kill him with a spear numerous times, and he chased after him and made him hide in caves and all of these things. I don't blame David for not trusting him. David decides to live in the Philistine territory. And because David was such a good man, he earned the respect of the Philistine king. That king gave David a collection of villages, kind of towns outside of his palace, outside of his gates, where his men could live and raise their families. So he and his men, about 600 of them, all their wives and children, their livestock, everything, were living in these villages. David was asked by the king to fight for him, but the king's men didn't want David because he's an Israelite. So I get their perspective. Well, how do we know he's not doing this as some long con and he's going to turn on us in the battlefield and kill us all? Good call, guys. So they decided to send David away and said, David, go back home. David agrees, and as he's going home, he gets to his location and he finds the aftermath of a raid. These men that had come and stolen all the women and children and taken all their livestock and whisked them away. And it was such a devastating moment that it says here that David and his men cried and cried and cried till they couldn't cry anymore. They were just devastated. And rightfully so. I get it too. I wouldn't want my wife and children stolen either. Well, when he finally comes to his senses, David consults God. And he says, God, should we chase after these men? And God says, yes, go get them. Go get your wives back. I am with you. David takes the 600 men and immediately pursue these other raiders. As he's on this journey, as he's pursuing them, we don't know how hard he's been doing it. We don't know how long they've been traveling before then. But at some point, 200 of his men are so tired and so weary that they can't go any further. So David says, you stay here. We're going to leave some supplies with you. You stay here. You rest. Come join us when you can, kind of situation. David and his other 400 men keep going. They eventually catch up to these raiders and slaughter them all. Just destroys them. It says they fought all night. Just every single one of these guys. And with the help of a couple different people, he was able to do this. And he found his wives, and he found his men's wives and their children and their livestock, and they were able to bring everything back. And they had an actual excess. They had a plunder, because I'm sure these raiders were going from town to town stealing stuff. So he had all this extra plunder. And when they meet back and they rendezvous back with their 200 men, that's where we're going to pick up in verse 21. Then David returned to the brook and met up with the 200 men who had been left behind because they were too exhausted to go with him. They went out to meet David and his men, and David greeted them joyfully. But some evil troublemakers among David's men says, they didn't go with us, so they can't have any of the plunder we've recovered. Give them their wives and children and tell them to be gone. But David said, no, my brothers, don't be selfish with what the Lord has given us. He has kept us safe, helped us defeat the band of raiders that attacked us. Who will listen to you talk like this? Or when you talk like this, sorry. We share and share alike, those who go to battle and those who guard the equipment. From then on, David made this decree and regulation for Israel, and it is still followed today. I love that story. It just shows a little bit more about why God says, this is a man after my own heart. David viewed the person that is the lowest of the low in his army as the same level as the general, the second in command in his army. He says right here, it doesn't matter if you're just guarding the swords or you're the one wielding the sword. You are equally important. And he's right. And I look at that as what should be our church model too, and hopefully I'm able to model it, and I encourage our people as well too, and our folks that come to church, I try to encourage that as well too. That whether you're greeting at the door, you're holding a baby, you're on the band, or doing any of these other things, you're all a part of the same team, and we celebrate together as we pursue God. That is what we do, and that's one of our core values here at Gold Creek. And I love how this concept is again reiterated in today's reading. If you go all the way to John chapter 12, this is Jesus being anointed right before his death. And we're going to pick up in verse 2. A dinner was prepared in Jesus' honor. Martha served, and Lazarus was among those who ate with him. Then Mary took a 12-ounce jar of expensive perfume made from the essence of nard, and she anointed Jesus' feet with it, wiping his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance. But Judas, the disciple who would soon betray him, said, "This perfume was worth a year's wages. It should have been sold and the money given to the poor." But Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but not always have me." I read those men who were frustrated with the 200 that didn't contribute to the battle. I read about Judas being upset because instead of taking this perfume and selling it, instead of Mary taking this, this moment, he wanted the money for himself. And it just reminded me of how I sometimes have that sin nature inside of me where there's the idea of contentment, and there's the idea of wanting more, and there's the idea of getting what I deserved. And I'm sure we can all relate to this concept where maybe we feel like we deserve more than the other person. We work harder at our job, yet this person gets the promotion. We are, my wife and I are busting our tails to work as hard as we can to afford our house, but our neighbor, he hardly does anything and makes twice as much as we do. My kid studies so hard, but my brother's kid, he doesn't study at all and he gets better grades. And we start to compare, and we start to wonder why we don't get these things. And my wife has instilled into my children the idea that comparing is the thief of joy. And so whenever my kids compare, if I give them a treat or I give them something and one of them has just a little bit more, they always seem to notice. It doesn't matter how even I think the ice cream scoop is. One of them has just a smidge bit more, and they will always say, "Well, why did they get more?" And we chime in, what does comparing do? Well, it's the thief of joy, and they do this, but it's going to resonate inside of them, and it's going to come out when it happens naturally. And my encouragement to you is, what is it inside of you that God has been telling you to pull back? That you've been comparing, that you think you deserve more, that you should be serving, just like Mary did, just like Mary lowered herself in this moment of thankfulness. You got to remember too, just a few chapters before, her brother was dead. Mary is not married. She is a woman in the Israelite time. She had no rights. She would have been on the streets. So her brother was her shelter. And when he died, it was like she had nothing left. And then Jesus raised him from the dead. So you don't think that played a little part in this, where she was so thankful that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, that she came and just fell at his feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And in some translation, it said that she cried and wiped her feet with his hair. And it just, that's the picture that I think God wants us to be like, both physically and spiritually and emotionally, with our influence, with the people in our lives. That we need to be willing to get down and wipe their feet with our hair, metaphorically. And that we're not comparing ourselves, and that we're not thinking that we don't deserve this or that we do deserve this. And we got to get away from that, because that's not how Jesus served. Because remember, he also washed the disciples' feet. In a few days, you're going to read that he washed the disciples' feet like the lowest of servants. He modeled to us the way that we should behave to others. So my encouragement to you today is, look for opportunities to serve someone. Don't compare yourself. Don't think that just because you don't have as much as they do, that they don't need to be served. Do this because Jesus did it for us. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time.